Now that we came back to our computer, we should see something that's very similar to that one that you're seeing in the image right here. 500 frames simulated and a very slowly reacting viewport. This is quite normal because we have at all the points of the grid there are many values stored, and every time we're rotating, RealFlow is updating those values. Alright, what we want to do next is create the displacement. Well, you might ask, why should I add in the displacement before I've added in additional elements such as foam and stuff like that? Well, this is because, for example, regarding foam, the foam needs to be swimming on top of the fluid. And if there is displacement, we want to have the foam on top of the displacement and not on top of, let me say, 20 centimeters above the displacement or under the displacement, because it has been calculated using a wave without displacement. You also may ask, why does the guy want to make us use displacement in the first place? Well, this is, in the beginning I've been talking that these large-scale solvers are very good at simulating general fluid flow. They're very fast and stable for doing so, but you do not get the tiny or the small-scale phenomena, the small-scale waves that are swimming on top of the fluid. So if we mesh that what we currently have and render that out, our fluid would look kind of boring and definitely not like a seaside or a river or whatever. It would just look very plain and boring. Very plain and boring because all the fine detail inside is missing. So what can we do about that? Add the displacement, and this is the stage to add the displacement after you have simulated your main body of water. So right now we're at frame 500. Let's get back to frame somewhere in the middle of our simulation. And as you can see, this is quite slowly. 2, 3, 8. Enter. So now the computer is caching, and as we can see, this is a nice frame with it's a nice wave, I guess. As you can see, it's starting to it's a nice curl. It's starting to crash there, and it's building a nice tunnel. Exactly what I was after. This is exactly the kind of wave I was looking for. All right. So let's see how we can add the displacement. So in order to see the displacement, we need to create a mesh. So we click on the grid on the mesh menu, and there should be, and if it's open, there's particle mesh, renegade, particle mesh standard, and the grid mesh. Those two are for meshing particles. This one's for meshing the grid. Alright, you have said, why can't we, these are all blue particles, why can't I mesh them? This is because, if you look here in the export central, pressing F12 opens export central. As you can see, we have a grid fluid domain writing out a GDC grid cache. And this grid cache is something that's not expressed as particles, as particle data. We're seeing those particles there, but they are, as I call them, marker particles, to show us where there are particles, where there is fluid, where there is water, and where there is no air. And all the points where there is water, there's a visual marker particle. There are some visual marker particles added in. You can render those particles if you like to, but for doing so, you have to do the following. You have to write the particle cache bin for the emitters. I'm just checking this in order to show you. But for this simulation and this tutorial, we are not doing so. Because you have to keep in mind that if you also write out these data, this kind of data, you will be writing out really huge amounts of data, and probably those 200 gigabytes or 300 gigabytes will not be sufficient. I think if we wrote out this, we probably need a terabyte. And as most of our computers, at least of our home computers, don't have a terabyte available for doing funny fluid simulations, we do not write those out. Also, we want to create displacements, so make sure the displacement texture TIFF is checked here. And yes, we're adding the displacement, and we're not adding the displacement on top of the particles. We could be doing so, but this is not our point right now. So, how do we add the displacement? Click here and add a grid mesh. This should add a grid mesh. And if I click here, the grid fluid domain 01, our only grid fluid domain in the scene, is automatically put under the grid mesh node. The next thing I'm going to do is I click on the grid fluid domain, and I'm going to hide that. And display visible, say no. Good thing about this is now this is reacting again. I can say build, and this thing starts to mesh. As you can see here, meshing, and this is our first impression of the grid mesh. I think I should use another different shader. Smooth shaded, that's alright. You can click on this, and there's the shader. There's no shader applied, so I'm using the displacement shader right now. So what we're currently seeing is the displacement for that scene, and it's pretty horrible. So we click on the grid fluid domain, and strangely, not in the mesh there. Here is a displacement tab. And then we can say quality. I choose 4K displacement. You also can choose other kinds of displacement. For me, 4K was great, so I used that, and well, then I'll be using, you can use those repeat U, repeat V values. Gonna increase the choppiness a bit. Have to wait a bit, and this will update on the fly. Just have to wait until the blue ring shows something. You can pretty much use those values because what we're seeing right now is a problem, because RealFlow is trying to read the a displacement cache. I've previously tried some displacement there, and as it was a 4K displacement, my graphics card does not have that amount of memory. This is looking highly distorted right now. I'm just changing the choppiness value a small bit, and I hope that when this thing finally is done, its calculations, I'll be seeing, yes, there's my man. This was what I was expecting to see. This is what I was expecting to see. Ooh, it's getting slow again. Don't care about the stuff that is happening under the pier, as this will not be visible in the final scene, because we were looking from the top, and in order to do something against those ugly holes there, I guess I will be I'll scale the pier in the final rendering a bit that will cover those parts. If you really had problems there, what could be done is adding a splash there and filling those gaps up with particles. And this would work. Splashes are not only good for creating wave crests or those really splashy movement. They are also very fine for creating particles where you need them. Okay, this is a displacement I like. I think it's nice. And don't need to care. There's no need to care for you about the other settings in the mesh. We're just doing a preview on displacement. I really like that very much. What you can do in order to change the displacement is change the vertical scale. This is one of the most crucial values. This will scale the height of the waves. The choppiness, the kind of waves that are wavelets that are created, and the repeat U and repeat V parameters. Keep in mind that when rendering the displacement, you need to know those repeat U and repeat V parameters. It's very important. But, well, if you don't know, you can open the file in RealFlow and look after. Okay, now that our displacement is done and I'm fine with that, what am I supposed to do now? Well, I just click on that grid mesh and press the delete button on my keyboard. Go to the first frame, go to the grid fluid domain, make it visible again on the first frame, nothing can happen. And now that I've set up the displacement, here in the grid fluid domain, I have to simulate everything over. No, you have to simulate everything over again. So if you're not done yet with cleaning your flat or whatever, or buying new shoes or preparing dinner, then you can continue while simulating. And keep in mind that you should definitely be saving before simulating. If your computer, for example, if your computer might break for a minute, then you are on the safe side. All right. Next up thing will be setting up the splashes and the foam.